Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
This is a bit surreal. And obviously the noises that I'm going to get are much louder than the ones that Joshie was talking about. It is surreal, and it's also I don't want to just use the word privilege again, because that's not enough. It's a deep gift to be able to sit here in front of all of you, and it's a deep gift to have the teachers that I have, and I feel like I'm kind of got my feet on a block, but on the ground, and like all of the ancestors are all there. Everybody who has practiced this practice is here sitting with us right now. And that feels sometimes overwhelming, but deeply reassuring. Not just me then. So you can see, I'm not quite as tidy as Josh. So
me neither.
So I've got things everywhere, and we'll just see how it goes. I've kind of written a list, but my guess is the list will probably be irrelevant, really. It's a bit like, I don't know what it's like for you when you go shopping. If you go shopping, you write a list and leave it at home, which is, yeah, but you kind of have an idea, don't you, because that's what this is probably going to be like, Lynne's shopping list. And when Josh invited me and said, would you like to do the Dharma talk on Wednesday, Lynne? And then he sent me the plum blossoms. Yeah. That was what it was like. I looked at the plum blossoms, I listened to the plum blossoms, and I thought, oh, it's a lovely title. But, and hasn't he done the most wonderful job of finding us a way into them? Thank you, Josh. Because they felt so obscure when I looked at them, and of course, me being me, I was looking for who's written about this? Who else has talked about this? Who is there that said something else about it? Because I don't know what it's about. And yet I also felt it. And that's what happens, I think. And so I had the privilege of introducing to, now I'm going to be a bit controversial here, because Josh said, when I said, how do you say his name? He said Saigyo. Last night Flint said Saigyo. So I'm going to say he's either Saigyo or Saigyo. I'll sit on the fence. But I must admit that Saigyo does remind me of milk pudding. So so I'd rather call him Saigyo. So, yeah, and what a privilege that is. I mean, and I don't know how it's going to go, this. Of course, I don't know how it's going to go. How could I? But I was really noticing how when you get a text, I don't know what it's like for you, and you kind of, if you've ever done any English study or any creative writing study or anything like that, you begin to decipher it. What does that bit mean? What does this bit mean here? Oh, that might mean this. Oh, that might mean that. Oh, well. And what happens, you begin to pull it apart. And I really didn't want to do that with this text at all, because, okay, it's all right. It feels like a really precious account and expression of a life. And how could you possibly pull that apart? You can't, can you? And when I read that actually he'd written over 2,000 poems in his life, he was very busy, wasn't he? But I'll talk a bit more about him in a minute, because I wanted to share two things that have really been sitting with me. And one was the last verse that Josh read out. And I'm going to read it because that's kind of really been sitting, and I'll remind you, because I suspect it's been sitting with you. The gentle hues of spring are everywhere, apparent in this eastern paradise. In heaven or on earth, the season's beauty is nowhere more fully realized than right here, right now. And that's all we've got, really, isn't it? Right now. You know, I'll be 81 this year. How does it take a lifetime to understand that all you've got is right now? Yeah, and how precious it is just to be sat next to you, and you, and you, and all of you. And the books don't really matter, do they? I mean, the words can tell us something, they can talk to us, they can open us out in various ways, but what really matters is the sitting here and being together, and your presence and my presence, and how brief it is, this little life we have. And how, when Flint talked in his talk, he talked about the qualities. I'm not sure whether it was the peach or the plum. I got them mixed up a bit, I think. But the peach, I think it was, that had the qualities of fragility and endurance and immediacy. And I've just been so touched by, I'm going to name you Sophie, that's okay. Sophie showing us so movingly her practice. And you've been sitting with fragility and endurance and the immediacy of pain.
Like we all do.
And we're all doing that in some way. We all have to meet and we all have to endure. We're all fragile. I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're in that rowboat as well that's going to sink us up. Oh dear. I was telling that to a friend the other day, and she said, "Really?" I said, "Really?" Like, how should we just be astonished at the fact? But yeah, so if we go back to Saigyo, poor man. Do you know, he wrote these poems, and he started this journey that is in this book of his life, and this has got 198 in, so there are lots of other ones. At the age of 23. Can you believe that? And I'll read you the first little bit, because there's no point in me reinventing the wheel, as they say. I'll read you the introduction so you've got an idea of who he was and what he did. This is kind of, there are lots of stories about him. And, you know, this thing is that he lived in the 12th century, so any of the stories, I think, might well be hearsay by now, but there must be some sort of idea, I suppose. Viewing cherry blossoms in their prime under a full moon was so sublime that sadness overtook him. An erotic encounter with someone high above the clouds was exuberant to the point of tragedy. So sorrowful, so heartbroken, so full of, do you remember that word that Josh used, awari? Which is a Japanese word conveying pathos, aesthetics, poesy, and the fullness of existence. This was the life of the wanderer, as in he wandered about, and he also wandered, Saigyo. And his life was from 1118 to 1190. So if you think that he actually started his wandering, if you like, at the age of 23, and he died when he was 72, which I think, for somebody in that era, at that time, probably was a pretty long life. So he did a lot of mountains, I think. His poetic form was called waka, is I think the way you pronounce it, and sometimes it's called tanka. And it's a poem that consists of, it's a syllabic poem like haikus are, so it's 5, 7, I can't do it with my fingers, can I? I've only got 5. 5, 7, 5, 7, and 7. And it's usually in 5 lines. That's really quite a tight structure, isn't it? You think? And though he was not well known while he was alive, he had the occasion to exchange poems with the former emperor and court ladies and poets. So he actually lived initially at the court and was just a really not very important, well, in our day it would be a soldier, actually, if you think about it. He was belonged to the samurai, and he was fairly low down, but he had connections with and knew of, because I suppose the one thing that you'll remember perhaps, that in the 12th century there weren't as many people, so he probably knew a lot of the people in the court and was known to the emperor. And at some point, and it might be because of love, and it might have been something else, he decided that actually I want to follow the Dharma. I want to follow the practice. He became a samurai who denounced his sword. He gave up being a soldier, being a fighter, he would be, I would imagine, a very physically fit young man. And the first poem that really speaks to that is, though I hold this world dear, I cannot remain attached. Only by forsaking the self can I be free. At this point he wasn't called Saigyo or Saigyo, he was called Norikyo, I think that's his name. So he became a monk. Can you imagine that? He just decided that was his calling, would you call it that? What brings us to practice? I don't know what brought you. Would you be able to name it? I don't know whether I could name what brought me here. Something yearns in you, something feels that this is the important place to be. So he resigned, basically. And he began probably by going to a temple, I would imagine initially, in order to a monastery to learn his practice. And then he said, I'm not going to stay here. I'm not going to try and be a priest. I'm not going to be anything up there. I don't want any of that. I want to live the Dharma by wandering around in the world. Which I think is quite amazing, really, that somebody at that age would actually think that. And I was thinking about us wandering around, which we've been doing, haven't we? We've done some wonderful, wonderful walks, I'm sure you all have, and I was just thinking about how beautiful it was when we went for our Dharma activity, both yesterday and the day before, and where we had the opportunity to be with nature in whatever way that touched us. And the poem that was coming to me all the time, so I'm going to read it because it kept singing to me. So I'll read it because it's here and because it feels the one that meets things. And you'll probably know it. It's called The Bell and the Blackbird, and it's by David White. The sound of a bell still reverberating, or a blackbird calling from a corner of the field, asking you to wake into this life, or inviting you deeper into one that waits. Either way takes courage. Either way wants you to be nothing but that self that is no self at all. Wants you to walk to the place where you find you already know how to give every last thing away. The approach that is also the meeting itself, without any meeting at all. That radiance you have always carried with you as you walk, both alone and completely accompanied in friendship by every corner of the world, crying, Alleluia. Thank you, David White. The world is so beautiful and so sad and heartbreaking. And we have to walk in it because that's our aliveness, one step at a time. And that's what he was doing, one step at a time. And I kept looking at, the hill behind us here that we've seen misty mornings, some days we haven't seen it, some days we have seen it, and then it's begun to sort of appear. And I was just imagining this young man getting his kit together, whatever he had. They used to have these sort of straw things they put on the backs, didn't they? They didn't have the wonderful waterproofs that we have. So he must have had with him, always had with him, his little box. I think they used to keep them in like a little box, their inkstone and their brush, and some paper of some sort to write on. What did he write on? He couldn't take his laptop. And he just went. He just went, and I think he must have had places in his mind initially to go to. But what he encountered was the world and himself. And And his poems are full of that combination of sadness and loss and wonder, and eventually that sort of recognition somehow that he's not any different from the blackbird or the cherry blossom. And I was thinking about the cherry blossom and thinking about how wonderful, I would like to point out to you that I have been a florist this week. And we know what that means. I am much closer to God. But the flowers are so wonderful. And Josh in his talk reminded us of the famous story of Buddha and the flower. And I just wanted to read to you one of our Sangha members who's been very, very diligently putting all of the talks onto YouTube for you, has sent an email after she'd listened to Josh's talk. And I really wanted to include her because she should be here. That's Maria. She should be here, and she can't be at the moment. And this is what she says. I had one of those little moments today that made me think of that story. The one where he holds up a flower and instead of explaining anything, just smiles. I answered the front door, and the postman was standing there looking up at me, smiling in that same kind of quiet, knowing way. And for a second, I didn't get it. I was like everyone else in that story, trying to work out what I was missing. And then he said, "You've got 3 pairs of glasses on your head." And that was it. That was my flower moment. I just went, "Have I?" And he nodded, still smiling. And we both burst out laughing. No embarrassment, no awkwardness, just that instant shift into something simple and shared. It reminded me of that moment, that story. The only one who didn't try to figure it out. The one who just met the moment with a smile. I think Maria could have a bell. Thank you. I'd just like you to close your eyes for a moment. And I wonder if you can remember what it felt like when you started to write your piece that you wrote for the Dharma practice. You might not remember the exact words, but I'd just like you, just for a moment, to remember that feeling. This is what Saigyo says. So much longing. When I look at it to soften what I feel, moonlight crushes my heart. even more. So much longing. When I look at it to soften what I feel, moonlight crushes my heart even more. And another one. A distant mountain field, hidden by clouds. As autumn departs, even to think of it is sad. And just one last one. How can the moon's one light in the sky reflect in unaccountable dewdrops? Uncountable, not uncountable. Uncountable. I'll say it again. How can the moon's one light in the sky reflect in uncountable dewdrops? Would you like to open your eyes again and see beautiful flowers all around you? You know, I got a bit fed up with the fact that the ancestors seemed to visit at 3 o'clock in the morning. They turned up at 3 o'clock in the morning, as Sally well knows. I think they should have better timing. But what they turned up with was, I was thinking about the path, and not the way, but the path, which for me is kind of, you know, what we feel we're walking along, not how we're walking along it. And this ancestor said, blossoming is the path. And I thought, oh, is it really as simple as that? I just have to blossom into the fullness and the wholeness of me. There isn't anywhere to go. I just have to see who I am. And one of the joys of being here with you is watching the petals unfold. And can you smell the peonies? They're wonderful. Yeah. It's so simple, really. You know, this practice isn't really complicated. We just make things so complicated, don't we? We make it hard for ourselves. There's a beautiful poem in here. If I can find it. There are many beautiful poems, but this one, you know, some of them speak to you more than others, which is inevitable, isn't it? And this is one I think that that Flint has shared before. Ice locked between rocks begins to melt this morning. Perhaps water beneath the moss is seeking its path. And I was thinking of all of us, you know, me included, meeting our barrier gates this week, identifying them as Josh so skillfully invited us to. And I was thinking, that's probably the ice, isn't it? That's the place where we're stuck. That's the place where we get locked and can't really move because it keeps coming and being there. And it begins to melt. A bit like Yoko Beck says as well. begins to melt. This morning, that's good, isn't it? Right now. And perhaps something begins to shift. The water beneath the moss is seeking its path. Things in us begin to move and shift towards the real blossoming. How can somebody say something in just 5 lines? I find that just so amazing. Mainly because I can't do it. Probably my 5 lines wouldn't be like that. I asked Sally if she would bring me this at any point in the tour. Don't tell me when you're going to do it.
Just think of the moonlight. It even shines on the furthest edge of an unseen, ordinary mountain. Just think of the moonlight. It even shines on the furthest edge of an unseen, ordinary mountain.
It does. Here for all of us. I didn't know what was in this. I'm going to make sure I read, because otherwise I'll say something else. I got these books, and I haven't used one of them. You know this book? By Blanche Hartman, Flint's teacher. Seeds for a Boundless Life. What sort of title is that? Isn't that wonderful? It made me think of Sophie, a little statement that you made about seeds looking for their place in all over the world, weren't there? There were seeds all over. You might know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Blanche Hartman writes, blooming into ourselves. I loved the first time I went to Sokoji Temple in San Francisco for Zazen instruction. This was years ago. The instructor was Katagiri Roshi, who was then a young monk, Katagiri Senzai, who had come up from Sensuji in Los Angeles to help Suzuki Roshi, because many Americans were wanting to sit Zazen. There he was, one person in this temple with a Japanese congregation who needed some help as well. This young monk came up from Los Angeles to help, and he was giving Zazen instructions. In the course of it, he said something like, we sit to settle the self on the self, and let the flower of our life force bloom. That was another one of those moments that have deeply moved me, and it has stayed with me forever. How do we let the flower of this life force bloom if there's nothing to gain from Zen practice? If this is it, our life as it is, and there's nothing to get, and we are complete just as we are, where does the effort come from if there is no goal? What's the purpose of it if there's no goal? It comes from the one who requires it. It's sort of like, what is the effort that daffodils make in order to bloom. There they are, bulbs under the ground in the dark. They are doing something is happening there under the ground in the dark that results in the bloom that we see when we walk down the path. What kind of effort is this that we make to allow the blooming to be completely itself, and with which we meet the world and appreciate this opportunity to be who we are. The work of the daffodil preparing to bloom is very quiet. It doesn't look outward to see if it's doing it right. How lucky is that? Oh gosh. It finds this bloom within itself. You find your bloom within yourself. Somehow. It comes from the very nature of the bulb. It comes from the very nature of being human. This bloom that we see as beautiful. It's beautiful from the beginning. It's completely there. It just needs conditions around it to help it bloom. It blooms. It's beautiful from the beginning. It's completely there. It just needs conditions around it to help it bloom. We've got some of those conditions, haven't we? Here, right now. But really, in Zen, practice centres and teachers provide the conditions. Thank you. For Buddhas to bloom. It doesn't say blooming Buddhas, it says Buddhas to bloom. But really, it's all there. It's all completely present, right with you, from the very beginning. This is our faith. In faith that we are Buddha, we enter Buddha's way. In faith we can bloom fully in the most appropriate way. We practice this practice. Buddha isn't somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.